Okay, so today we'll talk about two architects born on the same day, Antonio Sant'Elia and Hans Poelzig, an Italian and a German, both born on the 30th of April. So let's read a little bit about him. The truth is, the text I found on Wikipedia is a little bit strange. I don't know why. Maybe it was translated from the German, but anyway, I'll read a little bit about him. So Hans Poelzig, born, as you see, April 30th, 1869. He was older than Le Corbusier, about almost 20 years older, was a German architect, painter, and set designer. But the strange things show up now. Poelzig was born in Berlin in 1869 to Countess Clara and Henrietta Maria Poelzig, daughter of Alexander von Hanstein. I don't know who he is, Count of Poelzig, and anyway, he was an aristocrat, while she was married to George Ackland Ames, an Englishman. Uncertain of his paternity, Ames refused to acknowledge Hans as his son, and consequently he was brought up by a local choir master and his wife. In 1899, he married Maria Voss, with whom they had 4 children. I guess this is Hans Poelzig had 4 children. Hans Poelzig was buried in the old cemetery in Berlin, Wannsee. Anyway, in my opinion, a very important creator in architecture, and he should know, she should be known more than he is. Here he is, the man whose father is, you know, a little bit in the fog of uncertainty. He does look a little bit like a man whose father is a little bit in the fog of uncertainty. An interesting man, and I admire Hans Poelzig for his drawings, for his stage designs, for his expressionistic outbursts, and even for his social concerns. He was not just, you know, a capricious, you know, flamboyant expressionist. He also had very deep social concerns, and he built blocks of flats. Also, besides having, you know, so-called visions. So, Hans Poelzig, some drawings. Sorry, I wrote in Romanian here. I prepared this presentation a few years ago when I was talking to a Romanian audience physically, and now it's different. We have foreigners here, like yesterday we had an architect from Indonesia. The drawings of Hans Poelzig are certainly very, very good. And, you know, in the field of architectural rendering, by you know, manual drawing, I think he can be valued highly. I don't know if actually he did this. This was it's a column of a theater he built or rebuilt, because it was a prior existing building. We are going to arrive at it, and it's spectacular. But these drawings in you know, with maybe charcoal or pencil, they are excellent. And even such a sketch, you know, it has a spirit, it has character. With a few strokes, he was able to evoke something. So the drawings of Hans Poelzig are an important part of the collection of expressionist drawings. The expressionists in general drew well, and the drawings of expressionists are forceful, maybe more than, you know, some other architects who belong to other, let's say, movements or currents and so on. This is a proposal for it was not built, but you can imagine, you know, if it was built, it would have been the talk of the world. Even this one, you know, this rendering is done freehand with pencil, and it has emotion in it. It's not like the commercial renderings of today, you know, where employing all kinds of softwares or techniques, you know, you make something that sells well. This is a drawing which has artistic value because it has emotion in it. And maybe it would have had a good effect on a possible client as well. But you can tell this is a drawing done by the architect with his own hand, and it has artistic value, not just representational. It's not just a cold-blooded so-called representation. It's not, and it's not a commercial drawing, nor this one. Those people at that time, they drew manually, and if you were able to draw, unless you were Walter Gropius and you worked with someone who was able to draw because he couldn't, and this didn't mean he was not a good architect. It's possible to be a good architect even if you do not draw well. And Walter Gropius is a case that proves it. But as opposed to Walter Gropius, Hans Scharoun, as you can see, was quite able to draw. And of course, there is a difference between these sketches and the more elaborate representation of the building that he imagined. He built some remarkable towers, actually. Well, they are, utilitarian structures, but they could function like incredible cathedrals or temples. We are going to see them. But look at this drawing of trees. It shows clearly a sensitive man, someone who was not only obsessed by the wall of architecture, but who loved nature. And even in the drawings with buildings like here, which he imagined, you can still see somehow, the vibration, the movement of the life, actually, of nature. Now we start with this sulfuric acid factory in Lubon, Poland, from 1911, 1912. Look at this, this is, in my opinion, it's an impressive building. Yes, maybe these openings here are a little bit predictable because of their arches, but no one can deny the monumentality, the presence of this building. And you'll see some even more impressive, like this one. Maybe it's the same building seen from the other side. It probably is. Let's read again. What is it? A sulfuric acid factory. Well, I guess for that particular acid is the appropriate architectural expression, because sulfur is burning, is in a way an expressionistic acid, if I am to call it so. But this is not a typical factory, as you can see. It's architecturally, in my opinion, is quite impressive. Imagine something like this being built today. Anyway, fumes. So this was built in Poland. Now we look at the Kino Babylon in Berlin, cinema, 1927, 1929. This building still exists. And I think he built also the apartment building, not just the cinema within the building. I'm not sure about the message, on that screen. Eden is west. Anyway, let's hope Vladimir Putin doesn't think the same way and moves further west to arrive in Eden. Maybe Glenn will tell me how to pronounce correctly, Eden or Eden, if he's still here. Anyway, the cinema within that block of flats, Babylon. and Jack Nicholson right there for all to see in that film by Milos Forman. Milos Forman, an excellent director from the Czech Republic, I think. But he did a movie in Hollywood. Now, a department store in Wrocław, 1912, it still stands. A department store, Hans Poelzig. Not bad. I mean, you know, Eric Mendelssohn also did some department stores kind of in the same spirit, but there is a difference. I think Hans Poelzig has a certain tension in his buildings that perhaps, although Eric Mendelssohn himself was an expressionist, especially in the Einstein Tower, and not only. There is complexity. This architect Hans Poelzig was a complex architect, an artist. I don't have here pictures of his paintings. I read that he also painted, but you know, you saw the drawings. This man did have an artistic you know, nature, and you'll see it even more explicitly in his stage designs, because he designed for the film and for the theater, for this very famous German film, expressionist film, Der Golem. He designed a funambulesque, you know, stage design is amazing. I think he designed even the costumes. So here we see the design of mystical film architecture, Hans Poelzig. I mean, you know, it's enough to look at the poster to get a feeling about, and look at the architecture, the stage design that well, the architecture he built for this film. It's Gothic. It's Gothic through and through. And this man who you know lived in the 20th century as well for a good number of years. So what? He was a modern architect, modern you know, intellectual and artist. He had Gothic longings, but not like the Victorian architects or many architects in Great Britain in the 19th century. This is an anxious Gothicism. There is anxiety here. Look at this interior. You know, it's some kind of an architectural womb. You know, Gothic. I mean, it shows a great ability to evoke the darker side of life in a way, and you know, the mysteries of the soul, and you know, mystical things, and you know, some anxiety which, you know, related to the subject matter of the film. You see here, the Golem is a monster, you know, and I like this fact that an architect, you know, also does stage design and painting and writes and draws, and, you know, a cultural figure, someone engaged with his time, with society, not like the many robots, you know, working for all kinds of banal offices and just producing significant architecture. Now, the watercolors of Hans Poelzig, water towers, sorry, not watercolors, are amazing. I mean, this is a water tower, but look at this. You know, it could have been anything, you know, the Institute of Spatial Research, or the Institute of Psychoanalysis, or the Institute of, you know, Fright Nights, or the Institute of, I don't know, turbulences, or the Institute of Psychic Disorders, or the Institute of War, or it could have been many things. Instead, it's a water tower for God's sake. You know, I don't even know if it functions as, or if it ever functioned as a water tower. He built all of these things. You know, I mean, if an architect would build just these water towers that Hans Poelzig built, would feel accomplished. But he built many other things, and we are going to see some of them. A remarkable architect, and strangely, you know, not too many people know of him, at least in my country. Another water tower in Poznan, this one, yeah, look at this. You know, I mean, this is architecture. It is a watercolor, but yeah, it could have been some kind of another Goetheanum, or you know, another, maybe some kind of anthroposophic architecture. It's a water tower. You know, does it have force? Yes, it does. Could it be accused of masculinism? No, I don't think so necessarily, although it has, you know, stands up, you know, resolutely. It's an interesting building, and you will see a picture from the inside. Very, very interesting. Hans Poelzig. Look at this. You know, I mean, this is some kind of a rendering, but I'm not sure exactly what this was made for and how it was made. There is another one. Yeah, here. This one I love. This one I completely love. I would love to, you know, to refuse to exit life before I build something similar. I think is excellent. You know, it's sculptural, it's dynamic, it has everything. It has structure, it has the ornament of a wild structure, it has everything. A water tower. Anyway, and here we see, like in the manner of Andrea Palladio, half section, half elevation. Hans Poelzig in Poznan. Okay, now Four Domes Pavilion in Wrocław, also in Poland. This one, I don't know, it was refurbished, I guess, cleaned up. Is a little bit, for my taste, a little bit static and, you know, so-called almost classic. I don't see any Gothicism here, but it's still a noble architecture. It has dignity, and maybe a little bit too much. It's not as adventurous as the previous building, or maybe it appears so because it was refurbished. You know, it's a museum now. I don't know what it was initially. It's okay, I guess. And it is by this very prolific and interesting architect, Hans Poelzig. He was not the only one. The Germans had very interesting architects, you know, with all kinds of activities. You know, I was talking the other day when we read the manifesto of Bruno Taut. Bruno Taut also a very interesting architect, and there are others. Anyway. This is in Poland, as I said. Now in Istanbul, talking about about Bruno Taut, because the last years of Bruno Taut's life also happened in Istanbul, because he received a professorship there, and he left Japan, but he was German through and through. So this is the House of Friendship from 1916 in Istanbul, a project. It was not built, but remarkable. I mean, the house, this is the House of Giant Friendship, you know, the World Temple of Friendship. Maybe Putin should build it instead of waging war against Ukraine. The president of the United Nations was right. War in the 21st century is an aberration. I mean, it was always a tragedy, but somehow, after the Second World War, the Russians, who lost millions and millions of people, they started themselves another deadly war. It's just incredible. And even more incredible is that the Russians actually support, misinformed as they are. But could they be so disinformed that they don't know? I mean, it's clear that Russia invaded Ukraine and not the other way around. And how could Ukraine be, a Nazi nation when they have a Jewish president? It's ridiculous. And all those Russians do not think. And we talk about the house of friendship. What friendship? You think Putin never went to museums or never read some books or never met, many artists and defenders of peace and so on. And look, he learned nothing. And he's not the only one who would wage war anytime. A good building like this one by Hans Poelzig, I'm sorry it was not built, but anyway, he made a project. That's why I keep telling the students, even if you don't build, but no one can stop you from making projects. Take a pencil, take some paper, or draw digitally, express yourself. As Stephen Hall said, if you have idealism in you, take it out, express it. Now, this is his most, I almost said outrageous work. Is the most interesting visually, and it's a very, very sad thing that it was demolished. And it was demolished in 1988. So it survived the Second World War, and it was destroyed just 1 year before the reunification of Germany. It's just so sad. So let's read a little bit about it, because it is a remarkable work. The Grosses Schauspielhaus, the Great Theater, was a theater in Berlin, Germany, often described as an example of expressionist architecture designed by Hans Poelzig for the theater impresario Max Reinhardt, a great, and I recommend to the people here, I suggest, if you do not know it, Peter Eisenman did an interesting tower for Max Reinhardt, which unfortunately was not built, but in my opinion, one of the most interesting and also the most frightening somehow, at least for some people, projects by Peter Eisenman, dedicated to Max Reinhardt. So the structure was originally a market built by architect Friedrich Hitzig, and it retained its external gabled form. It then became the Circus Schumann, a circus arena. It was renovated by Poelzig and reopened in 1919, the very year when the Bauhaus started and was founded. Contained seating for 3,500 people. My God, my God. Max Reinhardt wanted to attract a working class audience. Isn't it beautiful? How many theater people, how many theaters or operas think of the working class people? Not many, but here was a very sophisticated, cultured and talented stage and even film director, Max Reinhardt, who wanted to attract a working class audience. And I love this because I think true intellectuals and true artists and true architects by necessity have at least affection for the underprivileged, and they should. And if they don't, they won't receive a lot of affection from me, but of course it doesn't matter a lot to them. Anyway, the large size of this theater allowed for people who could pay top prices for the best seats to support low cost seats in the back of the theater. painted red. My God, my God. I mean, you'll see it's very spectacular without any color. And in fact, I don't have color pictures of it because it was demolished in 1988. But the black and white ones will move you just as they are. So imagine it in red, painted red. It was a cavernous dome space and had no balconies, which contributed to its vastness. Its dome and the pillars were decorated with muqarnas, a honeycomb pendentive ornament which resembles stalactites. When illuminated, the ceiling's light bulbs formed patterns of celestial constellations, and the vaulted ceiling took on another concept, the night sky. In the lobby and elsewhere, Poelzig used colored light bulbs to create striking visual backdrops. I never saw colored pictures of it. You know, I like to imagine that there are somewhere some colored pictures. This is the building that he received. He didn't build it, you know, the gabled old market, but you'll see what he did inside. Look at it. You know, it's an image of God's kingdom. You know, it's celestial there at the top, and you see even more alarmingly audacious pictures. Towards the outside, okay, not so much. But the inside, the stalactites, you know, are striking. And I couldn't find too many pictures, but I hope this convince you of the originality of this huge theater, because, you know, 3,500 people in one room. But it wasn't just the theater per se, even the spaces, you know, around the theater, you know, the waiting areas and so on. Look at them, they are very interesting. He invented also this column. You saw a drawing at the beginning. Look at this and try to imagine that it was red. It was probably magical. It was probably an unforgettable experience to attend the play. And if it was directed by Max Reinhardt, all for the better. Brilliance. Now we are talking about brilliance. We are talking about two brilliant people, Max Reinhardt and Hans Poelzig, or Hans Poelzig and Max Reinhardt. This is what you get when you have brilliance. You get a special work. I love this work, but it was demolished. I don't know why actually it was demolished, because you know, it lasted for more than 40 years after the war. It's incredible. So it survived, you know, for about almost 80 years. In 1919, it was like this. We already saw it. And in 1942, it was like this. 1942, the war. In 1972, here it is, still standing. This was in the democratic side of Berlin, I think. Now, in 1920, a festival theater for the Salzburg project. I think later on I have pictures with it during demolition. Not that I want to depress you, but I expected them to be here, maybe on a different presentation. Anyway, it was destroyed in 1988, but I think I have pictures later here in this presentation. Now, this is a project. Maybe I want to show that around that time. So that was that work was done in 1919, and in 1920 he did this project for Salzburg, also for a theater, a festival theater. And you know, we are not surprised any longer, because we saw the interior. This is almost the carcass of that interior. I don't know if I express well. It's very similar to the interior, except is that we just saw of the Spielhaus in Berlin. But this one is towards the exterior. And it is, if it was built, it would have been amazing, without question. why is it that actually, often what is truly remarkable doesn't get built? But maybe that's a good thing. We save some oxygen. So this was imagined for Salzburg, and look at the interior as Hans Poelzig imagined it graphical. We feel now the expressionism of Hans Poelzig. Now, an office building in Hanover from 1924. I don't know if it still exists, but even if it's rectangular, I think it still has architectural character. And you see, he knew how to work with brick. So the brick, is employed sensitively in this building as well. It's what is its function? Office building. Yeah, it is an office building. I wouldn't deny it as an architecture, but maybe some might think is not as interesting as what we just saw. But personally, I like. I mean, look at these embroideries in brick. Yes, you can have a rectangular building, with regular windows, equal spacing between them. But with a brick, you can create interesting things. And that's because ornament is still a reality some of us should not forget about. And that's what he did here. Nobody asked him to play with these bricks in this way. But here it is creativity, it is artistry. The artist Hans Poelzig indulged in this exaltation in brick, if I am to call it so. Now, the Weissenhof estate. The Weissenhof estate is a very important colony of buildings built by important architects. 1926, 1927, Mies van der Rohe did I almost said the stage design. He did a master plan. He built a long collective housing there, Le Corbusier too, Hans Scharoun too. There were important architects, and Hans Poelzig was invited too. He did a modest single family 2-story home with a winter garden and the sun terrace at the Werkbund exhibition. If you go to Stuttgart, if the pandemic goes away, it's not too far away from the train station, and it's an important destination for lovers of architecture and students of architecture. Look, it's who's in the architecture of the time. Le Corbusier at the bottom. On the right, as we go here, there is the handsome Walter Gropius. Then Hilbersheimer. Then how many names do I read? You see Hans Poelzig on the right. And there are many important architects here, and they all built a building. Here we have Bruno Taut. Here we have Mies van der Rohe, Victor Bourgeois. I made presentations about most of these people. Oud, the Dutch JJP Oud architect, a very interesting enterprise. And Berlin also did this sort of thing 3 times. This is done in Stuttgart, but they understood. The Germans knew what they were doing. They created this colony, and it was a plus for the city, even in terms of cultural tourism. Later, and in Berlin they did it 3 times, in the 30s, in the 50s, and in the 80s. They invited important architects from all over the world to build, some housing. It's a good idea, and some other cities should try the same. Anyway, this is the building designed by Hans Scharoun, not Scharoun, sorry, Hans Poelzig. Yeah, you see, he was very versatile. the theaters that we looked at, the project for Salzburg and the theater built in Berlin. But look at the house now. Of course, you are not going to make a house like a theater, with stalactites and all the rest. Although, if Glenn is still here, yesterday we talked about Bart Prince. I'm not trying to say that Bart Prince built stalactites, but he is more exotic than Hans Poelzig. Hans Poelzig, again, would you think that this is the same architect who built that exotic theater for 3,500 people? No, but the drawings, the sketches, is like he tried, he was sharpening the lead of his color pencils on the side. These studies for the interior of this house, are interesting. I like these drawings very much as artworks. How else am I to call them? But the house is, socially concerned. It's not an expensive house. Is again, if the theater was built for, low-class citizens, this house was built also or imagined for, so-called common people, although it's not the smallest house if we look at the plan. But, again, it's not built for emperors or for presidents or for, Russian oligarchs. Plus, the Russian oligarchs don't like to live in buildings any longer. They rather live on huge yachts, which cost about 50 times more at least than a house like this one. I always wondered, they must be very bored, these oligarchs. What's the point of building a yacht which you use maybe a few times a year at the most and costs you $700 million? It's insane. Not to mention the many millions and billions of people who have nothing to eat in the world. It is an insane world. It's obvious. Hans Poelzig, interesting man, interesting drawings, interesting architect, interesting social worker, interesting stage designer. I like Hans Poelzig very much. And he even did, furniture design, as you can see. Now, a radio station in Charlottenburg, Berlin, from 1929. When you see this radio station, you say it's probably a little building, maybe a room. It's huge. Look at it. It's a huge building. It's a citadel. It's a town, actually. It's a town. It's unbelievable. And I don't know if it still. I guess it still stands. Yes. This is the radio station. Now, why would the radio station need something like this? So huge? I don't know. But it depends what you understand by radio station. The radio, I guess, was a great invention, and it ruled the world at one point, even for Citizen Kane, together with the newspaper. If you had a radio station at your disposal, because of a love affair, because of a broken heart, essentially, because having a broken heart, having a radio station and newspaper doesn't help. Like Blaise Pascal said, the heart has its reasons which reason does not know. Well, exactly. So you could have millions and billions and radio stations and newspapers and who knows what, and still collapse when you fall in love with someone who is indifferent towards you. You can die with all your newspaper and radio station. Anyway, it is a big building, if nothing else. And it's not bad, actually. The interior also has some, some interest here. Oh, Hans Poelzig was some kind of a magician, I think. I mean, imagine that this very man also did those Gothicist stage designs for Max Reinhardt, for Der Golem. But when you look closer, you know, from far away, you know, but you don't see details or the materials, the bricks, the ceramic tiles, but you'll see there are subtleties here which the sensitive soul of the architect, of the artist in the architect, played a role. So it's a good building, and I imagine it still functions very well. Look at it today in color. After so many black and white pictures, it's good to see some colored pictures. It's not bad. It's not bad, really. And of course, it was restored properly, so it looks fresh and brand new. Great radio station by Hans Poelzig. Great even with this kind of lighting. And you see, when we look at this, you would say, well, in the end, you know, he has straight corridors, you know, handrails, and an atrium, a central atrium. What else is there? And yet, no one can deny the visual interest, even excitement of this space. And look at the facade. You know, this, okay, this is a special picture, you know, looking obliquely, but you know, a building of that size could have ignored this kind of so-called details. And we are going to see that the brickwork is special, you know, it has various colors, these ceramic tiles. And by the way, ceramic tiles should be used again in architecture. I think the return, in fact, I feel like writing a manifesto, the return of the ceramic tile, because I think the ceramic tile has a great future. And it could mean a lot to architecture, and as it did in the past. After all, could we imagine Antoni Gaudi without ceramic tiles? Not to speak about the beautiful Islamic architecture. No way, you can't. Frank Lloyd Wright didn't have a lot of admiration for a lot of architecture besides his own, but he was in love with the blue domes of Persian architecture covered with ceramic tiles. Look at this modern staircase. Not bad. So he knew what he was doing, so to speak, Hans Poelzig. He did. He did, and this building, which appeared from far away as just a mega building, but without really anything interesting going on there, you can take countless interesting pictures with it. And look, they, of course, the Germans are they know how to take care of things. And you see, they are studying here, you know, which ceramic tile, the correct one, the proper one to bring to replace one that is damaged or something. I found this picture and I'm glad I found it. Now this one, the Farben building in Frankfurt, which became the Goethe University, which exists in Frankfurt. This one is huge too. Another, I don't know why, yeah, I guess was built for IG Farben building for Farben in Frankfurt, 1931. And now is the Goethe University. Then maybe Goethe did deserve such a huge, it's like again a citadel, a city. Look at it. You know, it's a massive building for a massive poet, if I would not insult Goethe with such a massive statement. Look at this. I'm sure, I think even Putin would have loved it. You know, but then with Putin, we have to be careful because, you know, he might soon say, this building belongs to me, it's Russian, and he will bomb it. So it's a good thing he doesn't like it, I imagine, and doesn't know about it. Hans Poelzig. I like this architect. A little mad, but I like mad people. You know, and even here there is, some tremor. You look at the facade, those shades, the materials are allowed to show some, dissent even, to have hesitations, to have dilemmas perhaps, or I don't know. It's a sign of bringing in some relativity. And I guess all these people are, going to courses or returning from courses, and all inspired by the name of the school, Goethe Universität. Not bad. So moving forward, this is in Frankfurt by Hans Poelzig, and look at the, within the so-called urban fabric, it's domineering, no, but it's in this case, let's allow a poet to be domineering too, because very often poets don't have this privilege. A huge building, yes. Okay, I think I showed you a shorter version of the Hans Poelzig presentation, because I remember, unless my memory is not working any longer, having showing other things as well. But anyway, we still paid homage to him, and I think we know a little bit about Hans Poelzig now. And I will talk about Antonio Sant'Elia, an architect who had the misfortune to die at 28, but he's still present in the discourse about architecture, and he will always be present. And he only left behind drawings. One building was built, though, based on one of his drawings by Giuseppe Terrani, a very important rationalist Italian architect. But let's read a little bit about this phenomenon, because Antonio Sant'Elia was a phenomenon. Living such a short life, architects usually live long lives, and still he matters. This was the man, and he matters not only because he was a good Italian man, good-looking Italian man. I mean, most Italian men are good looking. What can we do about it? And they know how to dress, unless they are Renzo Piano, who doesn't know how to dress. And it's just amazing. It's amazing that an architect of the caliber of Renzo Piano doesn't know how to dress. I mean, yes, Sir Norman Foster sometimes, shows, questionable taste in his choice of pinkish shirts. But Renzo Piano, I don't know if I ever saw him well dressed. But this is not the case of Antonio Sant'Elia. Let's read a little bit about him. So he was born in 1888, 1 year younger than Le Corbusier. In fact, not 1 year, because Le Corbusier was born in October and Antonio Sant'Elia in April the next year. Le Corbusier in 1887. So, half a year younger than Le Corbusier. And unfortunately, he died in 1916. At 28, was an Italian architect and a key member of the futurist movement in architecture. He left behind almost no completed works of architecture, and is primarily remembered for his bold sketches and influence on modern architecture. Now that word almost is unnecessary. I don't know of any building he himself built. The Manifesto of Futurist Architecture was published in August 1914, so 2 years before he died, supposedly by Sant'Elia, though this is subject to debate. In it, the author stated that, I quote, "the decorative value of futurist architecture depends solely on the use and original arrangement of raw or bare or violently colored materials. His vision was for a highly industrialized and mechanized city of the future, which he saw not as a mass of individual buildings, but a vast, multi-level, interconnected and integrated urban conurbation designed around the life of the city. So between 1912 and 1914, influenced by industrial cities of the United States and the architects Otto Wagner, Adolf Loos, and the Genoese architect Renzo Picasso, I didn't know this architect, he began a series of design drawings for a futurist Città Nuova, the new city, that was conceived as a symbol of a new age. Many of these drawings were displayed at the only exhibition of the Nuove Tendenze group, of which he was a member, exhibition in May, June 1914 at the Famiglia Artistica Gallery. Today, many of these drawings are on permanent display at Pinacoteca Como's Art Gallery. So let's look at his drawings. How could it be that an architect until he was 28 or even 26, you know, because he died at 28, but he made most of his drawings before as well, is still moving architecture, is still moving the world of architecture and the discourse about architecture. But then why does Piranesi do the same thing? You know, because Piranesi also, he built a little bit, but very little and insignificantly. Piranesi, and the student told me just a few days ago that Eisenman himself considers very, very highly Piranesi, and he's not the only one. Piranesi is on the list of mentors or you know, significant influencers, if I am to call him so, by Rem Koolhaas and even Wolf Prix, Piranesi and Piranesi and Piranesi, with his fantastic scenes of carcery, the prisons. Here we have drawings by Sant'Elia. So a drawing could be real. Those who think, you know, a drawing is not real, it's just a drawing, are wrong. In fact, I would say many built buildings are less real than this drawing done by Antonio Sant'Elia. Because what does it mean to be real? You know, just because you erect the walls, well, there are many buildings in the world that are, you know, so-called standing up, but they are totally meaningless and no one talks about them, and they have no relevance for art, for architecture, for culture, because architecture, Alvar was totally right. Architecture does not belongs to culture. Architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization. This drawing belongs to culture, and it is alive, and it is very well done. And Antonio Sant'Elia, you know, gained his immortality because of these fragile drawings. Now, the architecture he depicted is not so fragile, I would agree. You know, it's a tumultuous, urban, you know, forward-looking architecture. Maybe today we don't quite believe any longer in such things, but no one can deny the beauty and even the rigor, the precision of some of his drawings, like this one, Città Nuova. Why was he thinking about the Città Nuova, the new city? Because the architect is supposed to think about the future as well. You know, there are many works by many architects that especially when they didn't have too many commissions, they indulge in you know, creative schemes for either Paris, like Le Corbusier and his Ville Radieuse, or Broadacre City by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's in the nature of architecture to project horizons of hope, and thus to imagine sometimes even the unimaginable. It's important to keep the flame of architecture, the spirit of architecture. Is important to do such works as well, and not only, you know, build buildings that someone you know, commissioned you to build, because there are plenty of architects in the world that will die in obscurity, and people will continue to talk about Antonio Sant'Elia, who didn't build, but he didn't have to, because there is truth and there is reality in his drawings and his imaginings, even though he made them more than 100 years ago. They are good drawings and they are good visions. You know, he envisioned certain architecture, and he did so convincingly. And then you also have to understand, he was young. He was in his 20s, you know, about the age of some of the students who are here. He was not much older, you know, maybe 1 or 2 years older or something like this. See, he could have been a student at 28. He was a student, in fact, because I think a great anything is a student all or his or her life, all of it, because a true Newton was too. Any creator in any field, exactly because he's in the process of becoming even younger, because as Le Corbusier said, the problem in life is not to remain young, but to become young. It's this quest for, you know, it's a quest for lapis, as the alchemists called it, you know, the philosophical stone, the fountain of eternal youth. This is what humankind always search for, the fountain of the eternal youth. That's why there are people in the 90s, and I mentioned Eisenman, and I like this fact very much. At almost 90, Eisenman is studying Alberti, Renaissance spirit. And he was, at least, you know, for a time, you know, associated with the deconstructivists. So Frampton is very alive at 92. Frampton, when he received the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennial, he was, I think, 88 then. And I never saw all my life until now, and I'll probably die, and never see someone laughing as Frampton laughed in Venice at 88. He was probably approaching 89 when he received the Golden Lion. Search for his picture. It's unbelievable. I mean, that kind of intoxicating laughter, mad laughter, is certainly the laughter of someone who achieved or was very close to reaching that fountain of eternal truth, eternal youth, sorry. So back to Antonio Sant'Elia, who was young, though. He didn't have to, you know, search for, unfortunately, he died young, but he was young when he did all these sketches and these drawings. Of course, the pragmatist and the functionalist would say he was mad. Who asked him to do these drawings? Who asked him to imagine, you know, Città Nuova, the new city? Nobody. But then who asks a poet to write poetry? You know, who asks a painter, a genuine painter, to paint? Nobody. When Joseph Brodsky, the youngest poet who received the Nobel Prize for Poetry, I told this short story, but it's my pleasure to repeat it. He was living in St. Petersburg. He was Russian, and of course, he was destitute, and he was not working. And because it was communism, was in Soviet Union, you know, he was brought to justice because he was considered a parasite. And there was a court procedure against him, and there is, you can find on the web, the stenogram of the dialogue between the judge and the trembling, or maybe not so trembling, very young poet. And the judge asked him, what do you do for a living? He said, I write poetry and I make translations. He said, did anybody ask you to write poetry and make translations? He said, no. Did you go to a school to learn how to write poetry and to do translations? He said, no. Then he said, how come you dare to, you know, indulge in writing poetry when the comrades are working and you are just fooling around, you know, reading and translating Dante and who knows who? And Brodsky said, well, nobody had to ask me, or you know, nobody had to teach me. It came from God. Well, he said the truth, actually. It came from God. Some people are chosen by God. Of course, they pay for this great privilege. You know, usually they have hard lives and so on, but you are inspired. You are inspired, you know, you are just a medium. In fact, it wasn't Joseph Brodsky. It was maybe, let's say, God himself or herself or itself, because we don't know what God is. Sorry for my iconoclasm. Acted through him, and he was a medium, you know, a terrestrial medium chosen for this. A very important poet. One day I will tell you a story about Brodsky when I met him, and he was immensely miserable. And I have from Brodsky a letter, which is the ugliest letter ever written to me. Anyway, it was about the death of book. Anyway, let's go back to the drawings of Antonio Sant'Elia, another man inspired by the gods, by the celestial forces, who choose certain people among us to, you know, express things that until then were not expressed. Of course, architecture is an art. Of course, it's different than what Brâncuș thought, because Brâncuș thought that a building is an inhabited sculpture. No, I think it's a little bit more complicated. That's why often there are the words art and architecture. Although at its best, architecture becomes an art. And the building, in order to become architecture, has to do it through art. But there are distinctions between art and architecture. And, you know, are these works artistic? They are. Are they architectural? They are. They are both. Those who contest the artistic quality of architecture, as I said many times, should just open almost any history of art, and architecture will be copiously present there. Maybe even the drawings of Antonio Sant'Elia. This is the building that was built based on this very drawing, actually, but it was built after his death by, I think, at least 10 years after he did it, maybe more, by Giuseppe Terrani, and helped by Marinetti, the futurist poet, who understood the value of the drawings by Antonio Sant'Elia, and they were able to, I don't know exactly who paid for. It was built almost identical with what you look here, and I don't know if I have a picture of it here. I should. The monument to the fallen. Yes, here it is. Again, it was built based on this drawing by Antonio Sant'Elia, but it was built after he died by Giuseppe Terrani. And it is an impressive building. I hope I have a text here about it. Let me see. No, sorry. No, my presentation needs some improvement, sorry. But this is the monument, designed by Antonio Sant'Elia, or envisioned by Sant'Elia, drawn by Sant'Elia, but built by Giuseppe Terrani and some other people. But Terrani and you know, a moral helper there was, and maybe more than moral, was Marinetti, the important futurist poet. And actually the manifesto, the futurist manifesto, is debated if it was written by, I think initially it was written by Marinetti, and then Antonio Sant'Elia wrote a second version. There are two versions, I think, of the futurist manifestos, and manifesto, and one is by Marinetti, one by Antonio Sant'Elia, and it's possible there is some kind of a hybrid manifesto that was born from the collaboration between the two. It's a monument, but it has an appreciable modernity, I would say, still very much a monument, yes. Now this is something, it's a visualization, it's a render, as Arch Daly uses this word. I used to know the word rendering, but they use the word render. It's a rendering based on a visualization, sophisticated and complex, based on the drawings of Antonio Sant'Elia. It's not bad. I mean, you know, somebody did some work here. By the way, there is a book with the digital building of the unbuilt works of Louis Kahn. I used to have that book. I don't know if I still have it. It's very moving because, you know, some of these renderings, you could almost swear that they are, you know, they show the reality that it was built. There are books published by Sant'Elia. There was a commemoration, and they published many. You see, visione regola, vision rule, regulation, futurismo e razionalismo nel monumento al caduti di Como. But you know, the rationalism, I guess, is via Giuseppe Terrani, who was a rationalist architect, and quite a good architect himself. Here is another one, All'origine del progetto, Antonio Sant'Elia, Pinacoteca di Como. In Como, there is a very important, maybe the most important building by Giuseppe Terrani, Casa del Fascio. He was also a fascist, but those intellectuals had a different understanding of fascism than we do. Well, later, you know, after the misery and the tragedy of the Second World War. Antonio Sant'Elia e l'architettura del suo tempo, Convegno Internazionale, in 2016. You see, this young man who died at 28, you know, almost 100 years later, there are conferences, there are books published, posters made, because it is spirit. It is the spirit of the work that transcends time and transcends, you know, frontiers, physical frontiers as well. Antonio Sant'Elia, Il futuro delle città. Are we thinking about the future of the city? Some of us are. There are projects, you know, now confronted with various crises. Let's hope we'll survive this horrible tragedy in Ukraine, and maybe humankind will, and also the pandemic, and maybe we'll think again about horizons of hope. Now, I want to end this presentation. This doesn't really have a relation with, I mean, it does, because I will show some futurist architecture, but from Africa. I thought to include this short material about it because I myself, I was surprised. I didn't know there was a futurist architecture in Africa. You know, you wouldn't expect it to be in Africa, but Italian architects actually built some, you know, so-called futurist buildings in Asmara, Eritrea. And I want you to see them by the way of Antonio Sant'Elia, who was and is considered a futurist architect. So once a sleepy corner of the Italian empire. So that's the reason the Italian architects built in Eritrea's capital, because it was, you know, part of the Italian, it was a colony of Italy. In Eritrea's capital, Asmara, is home to one of the world's best collections of futurist architecture. Yes, this happens because, you know, I'm sure, or I think, or I hope that the Second World War didn't arrive in Eritrea. So here it is, you know, a gas station, if you can believe it. It's in Africa, but it's, you know, I mean, look at that canopy. And not just the canopy, the whole building has a exaltation that, you know, indeed futurism was aspiring towards. Interesting work, particularly that, you know, audacious canopy. Look how it looks from above. Not bad. Not bad at all. If you build such a building today, it doesn't have to be for Fiat, because you see the name of the Italian car right there on the facade of the building. But if you build such a building today, you'd make it to the pages, either digital or so-called real, of magazines. Eritrea. Let's read again. What's the capital of Eritrea? Asmara. Nice name, Asmara. So Asmara, I'm sure I will forget it because I don't have at all the memory of names. Now, an Orthodox church. This is an interesting building, and it's even more interesting because it is in Africa. But then I showed not too long ago, a few days ago, that formidable sunken church in Ethiopia. You know, one of the most remarkable churches in the world, in my opinion. But look at this one. This one is not bad either. But it's true, it was built by Italian architects. But, you know, somehow, who knows, maybe the landscape, the light, the sky, the earth itself inspired the architect, because I don't know, it's possible this very building, if it was built in Italy, would not have looked like this. It's possible. Yes, it's a little bit, I mean, not a little bit, it is symmetrical, it's, you know, it has a geometry that is hard not to notice, but I think it's interesting. This is not a church, it's a house, a villa in Asmara, in Eritrea, Africa. And here is another building in the corner of a street. Interesting, no? I really found out about this, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. That's it. So let's wish Antonio Sant'Elia happy birthday, and also Hans Poelzig happy birthday, and thank you for being here on this day of Saturday, April 30th, 2022.